undoubtedly every organization has to have a mission and cannot leave things to luck, but then that actually doesn't guarantee its permanence, because you need all the elements in administration. What are the strategies you propose to take advantage of the opportunities that every higher education institution has? For instance, when you have delinquency, crime, corruption, and also technologies in financial and political are part of the problem, and we want to say hello to you from our institution. The thing is that we want to know how we can deal with abandonment, when people desert, when people drop out, and those problems. How that's also part of the risk.
Very interesting. My instinct is to come to Jim on the identification of issues so that you avoid relying on luck, Jim, to respond and recover from an event, and then we follow up with the other piece. But let's start with how we avoid relying on luck when it comes to business continuity and risk management.
That's a good question, Dan. I think the way to avoid luck really is to organize within the university. You need to get together a group of people that represent the various departments throughout the universities. You need to sit down and you need to discuss what the most critical aspects of your operations are. What are the things that you need to do on a day-to-day basis to continue to operate the university? Those have to be identified. You also need to identify recovery time objectives. When do these particular functions that you determine critical have to be up and running in order for you to service your students and the public as well? So that's really, I think, the most important thing that you have to do at the very beginning of this process.
How do you structure that team? How many people should be on it?
Typically, you shouldn't have any more than 7 to 10 people. If you have any more people than that, things can get pretty confusing. So I would say 7 to 10 is the optimum number that we've seen.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I think that's a great response to a very, very good question. And we'd like to take our next question from the Polytechnic National Institute for Continuing Education, also in Mexico. So if we may have that question, I'd appreciate it.
Good morning. We have the following question. Where do you classify the risks that are derived from the know-how, giving away secrets of know-how and industrial secrets by people who are unfair to the company and who give away this? How can you prevent this from happening? How can you detect people who are going to give away the secrets of the company?
Boy, there is a tremendous question that this country is facing in record issues, if you will. The technical aspect of protecting intellectual property, yes, protecting proprietary information. John, you want to give that a shot?
That's really a tough one. That's the kind of question of how can you look at a person or a group of individuals and identify the person who's going to lie to you. There is no simple answer to that. The best I can suggest is to establish processes for highly technical or highly confidential material that it does not leave a controlled site. Here in the United States, we're experiencing a problem right now where we have a research scientist for the government who's been accused of taking nuclear secrets and trading them to a foreign government. So it's an all-inclusive problem. There's nobody that's immune to it. On a much simpler basis, copyright infringement issues for a university is an ongoing problem. You have professors who want to utilize material from a published source, and they like that particular source, so they'll want to use it again and again and again. That would violate copyright infringement laws in the United States and most international copyright laws. So that becomes an issue of educating your constituents as to what is appropriate practice in the use of intellectual property and what falls outside of the appropriate practice.
I think it's a great question from a couple of different perspectives. It's going to provide us a great link to Jim's comments a little bit later from business continuity, because not only do we need to try and minimize those types of issues, loss of intellectual property, for example, but how do we recover if something does happen and get back up and running? And we will be there in just a few moments. The next question is from the Universidad Autónoma de Baja California Sur in La Paz, and we look forward to your question.
Thank you. Inactivity in a country or a state, isn't it calculated and assessed? The risk that many countries run, especially those who are in the developing countries, that have a lot of obstacles because they have had to cancel some projects because that have to do with finances or environment, and because of lack of resources, they have to be called off. So how does the government organize itself with the productive and social forces in order to put together a team of people who can really assess the risk of that underdevelopment or of that downtime, so to say, and that backwardness in the financial and economic areas? Those kinds of risks.
Thank you for that question, and I'm going to take a shot at sort of analyzing the components of that. And it has to do with the developing operation, a developing nation, and the need to embark on productive activities, but not having the resources to withstand the manifestation of a crisis or a disaster. So, Jim, let's just come over here from basic business continuity. We have an operation, something that's happening, and we're impacted by a crisis or a disaster. What strategy works best to help somebody with limited resources to overcome that issue? And you can think about it from the management perspective as opposed to the financial perspective, I think.
That is a very difficult question. We've had a lot of questions that come in from our clients in Latin America and Mexico who have expressed that concern that they may not have the resources available, within their particular structure there. I think, again, it goes back to an earlier question that in order to determine what these particular risks may be, what these particular deficiencies may be, the group of people within the government, an organized group of people, have to sit down together and to discuss these issues to make a determination of what may arise, what risks may arise, what deficiencies may arise. They need to talk together and collaborate as to some particular or potential alternative recovery strategies. In some cases, they're not going to be able to identify, and they're going to have to live with that risk. In other cases, it's amazing what people can do when they get together and discuss these issues. And in a lot of cases with some of our clients, they come up with some amazing options. So that's really, again, the first step I think they have to do.
And I think perhaps the most valuable piece of that is the alternative strategies that are developed for recovery, not relying just on one. Some may be financial, some may be operational in terms of the ability to withstand the manifestation of a problem. Thank you. Great question. The Universidad Tecnológica de Tecamachalco, and help me with the pronunciation, please, brings us our next question. Thank you.
Buenos días. Our question is the following. Our institution is in an area that has been very frequently affected by earthquakes, some of them very high intensity, but we also have the Popocatépetl volcano very active here. That's another risk. Therefore, we are always having to buy insurance policies to... What are the advantages and disadvantages do you see here? What can you comment on this situation?
John's ready to answer without it being thrown to him, but we've got the issue of insurance and then perhaps responding in recovery. So go ahead, John.
Well, being a good risk manager, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact of site selection as one of your first risk management criteria. However, relocating an organization such as a university from its existing site is usually not a practical option. So let's assume that that's not practical. Then you have to get into the issues of your geological abilities. What sort of resources are available to you to diagnose the potential for an explosion of the volcano or an earthquake? And look at the structures themselves to see how well they're designed to withstand certain types of shocks. An earthquake is fairly straightforward in that sense of being able to identify the structural integrity. Realizing that you're looking for life safety first and foremost, and then the preservation of the structure itself. As far as a volcano, depending upon how close you are, you have the whole issue of the shock wave coming from the volcano, the ash, the lava flows. Those are more imminent exposures that I'm not quite sure there's any degree of structural integrity that you can apply to a building that's in the near perimeter of a volcano and allow it to survive.
Yeah. Sometimes just being able to manage the resource after an event is the most critical issue. And we're going to move now to our next question at the Universidad Tecnológica de Panama in the Central Region, Veragua. And your question, please.
Question is the following. The managers, how long have they been around, these risk managers? Do they have anything in relation with ISO standards by any chance? Do they have anything to do with ISO?
Brief.
Thank you.
Brief response to that, John. Risk management, ISO, how long have risk managers been around?
I've been a risk manager on a professional basis for 14 years, and I practiced risk management for approximately an additional 9 years before that when I was involved with commercial insurance.
Okay. Any idea about relationships to international standards and whether there's anything that connects?
I'm very unaware of the international standards in that area. I'm not able to answer that.
Well, that's a great question for us to follow up on, and we'll provide the associates and the networks a response to that. So if we can make a note, we'll get an answer. So thank you. Great question. From the Universidad de Sonora in Hermosillo, the next question, please.
Morning. Greetings from the University of Sonora in Hermosillo, Mexico. Congratulations to the speakers, and John Watson and James Pinzari. The question is related to this. This is a rather new field, and it's interesting because of the importance and the dynamics of the world today, and also because we all need to manage risk. And so Mr. Watson was talking about who's a professional in this field. He was talking in general. I would like to ask him, if possible, to say more specifically some of the topics that we need to, what does a person like you study? If we were to design a curriculum, a career, a profession, or a study curriculum in this field for a university, what would be the major topics to be included in this degree track?
I may be setting myself up for some problem with the academic folks in the United States who do have programs on risk management. But my personal perspective on it is a well-rounded general education is among the best features of a risk manager. Not only a good liberal arts education, but a strong emphasis on finance and a strong emphasis on engineering. And it doesn't hurt to have a good experience with insurance. If you bring all those issues together and have a good ability to interact with individuals, you're able to facilitate a large number of subjects and help a lot of people solve their problems.
Very good. I think from my experience, what we're seeing now is that the risk management function is sort of tilted toward the financial aspect more so than the risk control or the safety aspect of things. So
almost too much so.
Yeah, very good. And so we need to balance the picture. Technology, science, everything is critical. Gentlemen, thank you all for your questions, and thank you for your excellent answers. Let's now move to the second module of our program, in which Jim Pinzari will speak about risk management strategies and the essential topics of business continuity planning.
You just heard John talk about the three major components of the risk management process, which are identification of potential hazards or threats, quantification of the impact to your business, and the application of various risk management techniques to reduce loss potential and business impact. I'm going to expand upon those areas and talk about business continuity planning in particular as a risk management technique. Today's businesses operate in a highly competitive and increasingly global marketplace. Over the past 10 years, fierce competition, rapidly changing customer requirements, short product life cycles, and innovations in information technology have forced businesses to become lean through supply chain management and the elimination of redundancies. In order to maximize supply chain efficiency, organizations focus on such areas as transportation, distribution, logistics, and procurement in order to improve customer service, optimize inventory, and increase profitability. It is these changes, however, that create significant exposures which can result in potential business interruption. The challenge today is to implement these critical improvements as well as to develop recovery strategies to hedge against these exposures created by them. As businesses employ these sophisticated supply chain management techniques, they also are taking strong measures to eliminate redundancies. Redundancies take many shapes. Physical redundancies are one example. Consider such strategies as maintaining extra copies of critical information, securing backup power generating equipment, and the use of off-site data centers. Each of these redundant capabilities can be evaluated as to need and cost. And clearly, the need for such capacity, if you will, spans government, education, and for-profit operations. Based on the criticality of an operation or its independent processes, the security provided by having backup or redundant capabilities more than justifies the cost of redundancy. Remember, if you need to install a generator to keep critical equipment operational, you can calculate the cost of the generator, the construction cost for the installation, and the monthly fees to test it. What is difficult to calculate are the intangible costs. For example, loss of market share, loss of customer trust, and rebuilding both of them. Consider for a moment a government entity, those responsible for infrastructure. Power, water delivery, and sanitation services must develop the ability to provide these services at some predetermined level if and when an emergency, crisis, or disaster occurs. There are many ways to build redundant capacity for infrastructure. All take planning, exercising, and yes, the allocation of financial resources. One way for a government operation to defray some of the financial considerations is to develop mutual aid relationships. In the absence of a regional disaster, fellow governments, given a formal relationship, may be able to step in and help overcome the hurdles presented by the event. It is easy to ask the question, how much will this cost? That is, the cost of the improvements or the redundant capacity. The answer lies in your decision concerning the degree to which you wish to recover. If, for example, recovering only a portion of your operations is your decision, then the costs of redundancies are relative to achieving full recovery. The hidden risk inherent in all these efforts to eliminate redundancies, reduce costs, and increase efficiency throughout the extended value chain has reduced any tolerance for disruption. Think about your own organization. What if a sole supplier does not meet a critical delivery date? How would your business be affected if there were an interruption to your just-in-time delivery system? What if a fire, earthquake, or hurricane destroys your facility? No location is immune to natural disasters. Recall Hurricane Andrew in Florida, Mitch in Honduras, earthquakes in Turkey, Kobe, California, and Colombia, and devastating floods in Florida, southern Mexico, and France. Or think about the threats that occur every day, such as product tampering, terrorism, power outage, and vandalism. Any of these threats could negatively impact your product image in the marketplace and seriously damage your business. Without a business continuity plan, even a minor disruption can be amplified throughout the extended value chain, well beyond any insurance can cover. What about your market share, sales volume, growth rate, shareholder value, customer satisfaction, product quality, time to market, profits, and costs? Even when short-term emergency response activities are in place, these often fall short of coordinated long-term processes aimed at recovering functional operations on a timely, efficient basis. Executive management, risk managers, facilities managers, and engineers and operations personnel must properly plan for all risks, including those which may be catastrophic. A well-constructed plan should outline the key actions, responsibilities, and benchmarks necessary to reduce critical operations within acceptable timeframes while preserving the value and the reputation of your organization. Effective planning is critical when you have limited or no excess production capacity. Many companies today operate as much as 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Think about just-in-time delivery systems. Most companies have dramatically reduced raw material inventories, in some cases to only a few days' supply. Single or sole source suppliers create additional concerns. It's a very common practice to have a single supplier in order to reduce costs. In some cases, there is only one source for a particular material, and it could take as long as 3 to 9 months to qualify another supplier. Effective risk planning is also critical when your organization utilizes custom equipment which may have a long replacement time. Depending upon the type of equipment, typical lead times vary from 3 to 24 months. Operations consolidated into a single facility. This is common to both manufacturing and distribution facilities and represents a significant exposure. Critical operations or functions, such as custom or automated production, telecommunications, or data processing. An example of this would be an event where you lose power or communications to your automated storage retrieval system. How would you locate your products? How long would your customers be willing to wait? Competitive business environment with no tolerance for downtime. Is your business so highly competitive that even a short interruption to your operations could cause a loss? And lastly, planning for risk is essential if your organization has significant exposure to natural threats such as hurricanes, earthquakes, or flooding. I've spent the last few minutes talking about man-made and natural threats to business, as well as operational risks created as a result of supply chain management. Detailed assessments clearly include the evaluation of financial threats. From a business continuity perspective, focus should be on availability of funds to pay for recovery efforts, as opposed to impacts on the financial markets. Financial and currency risks were a strong element of consideration in the risk management structure John Watson spoke about earlier. Social and political threats are likely considerations for many parts of the world. Whether the impact of social unrest or a fiercely debated political contest can be withstood is often the result of prior evaluation and planning. In the U.S., for example, months of planning go into the management of a political party's convention. In Los Angeles, offices, including the Marsh office, closed for 2 days while a Democratic National Convention was underway. However, essential functions could not simply be shut down, so some were diverted to other offices and critical staff were sequestered in the building during the entire convention. As I've noted and will reiterate, the planning for such business continuity activities is essential, and such planning is not passive. I think it's clear to see that business continuity planning is a necessary course of action when faced with these circumstances. Now let's talk about the planning process itself. The business continuity planning process involves 3 phases: the pre-incident planning phase, the plan or document develop phase, and the testing phase. Pre-incident planning is the process of systematically identifying threats and operational risks, quantifying and mitigating their exposure, and developing response and recovery strategies. Plan development documentation incorporates 3 planning components, including emergency response, crisis communications, and business recovery, and associated documentation of the actions, responsibilities, and resources for effective response within those areas. Plan testing is completed on a periodic basis to ensure it remains an effective tool for recovery. First, I'm going to talk about pre-incident planning and its components. The first component is threat identification. Buildings, operations, people, and environment are all vulnerable to many different threats. Effective planning should be based on both man-made and natural threats. Some good examples of man-made threats are fire, explosion, utility outage, and water leakage. However, they can also be caused by natural threats such as earthquake, lightning, and high winds. Other man-made threats would include a hazardous material spill, release, or civil disorder, mechanical breakdown, intentional acts of terrorism, vandalism, sabotage, or product tampering, and workplace violence, which is on the rise in the United States. Man-made threats, for the most part, are local in nature. Natural threats, which seem to be increasing over the past 10 to 15 years, include earthquake, hurricane, tornado, typhoon, flood, and wildfires. Natural threats tend to affect a much larger geographical area and could potentially impact several or many of the business's facilities at once. Once you've properly identified these types of threats, there are many loss control or loss reduction measures you can implement to reduce or eliminate loss potential. Loss control should be viewed as your first line of defense to institute mechanisms to lessen the exposure to a particular threat. The more threats you eliminate or control, the less likely you are to have to use your business continuity plan. Some of the best examples of loss control to protect against man-made and natural threats include additional sprinkler protection, structural reinforcement of your facility, emergency response training, regular inspection and maintenance programs, purchasing your own generators or having an agreement with your electrical contractor to lease a generator in the event of a power outage, and employee training and awareness programs. This has become very important in the United States in order to reduce workplace violence incidents. The second component of pre-incident planning is operational risk analysis. Operational risks are created as a result of strategic business decisions made in order to be more competitive and profitable. During an operational risk analysis, you need to ask yourself many questions. Here are a few examples. Is your equipment custom made and would it take a long time to replace? I've encountered situations where circuit boards tested by a single piece of test equipment failed 50% of the time. If this piece of equipment were damaged or destroyed, there would be no way of identifying on a timely basis the particular component part that failed. Business interruption at this particular facility equated to $3.5 million in lost revenue per day. Have you identified most of your critical documents and records? Are they properly backed up and stored off-site? This was also a major issue concerning my previous example of the test equipment. I discovered at this facility there were no up-to-date specifications to recreate the test equipment, which had been customized several times over the years. The importance of vital records management and proper backup procedures cannot be stressed enough and is one of the biggest problems in business today related to business continuity planning. Are all your operations housed in a single building, exposing total capacity to a single event? Many companies today manufacture their products at one facility. Distribution networks have also been dramatically reduced to lower operating costs and improve customer service. In most cases, the loss of a distribution facility would be devastating to a business without proper recovery strategies in place.